Welcome to Les Bons Mots, a podcast about language learning by ACA, a language training school based in Quebec, Canada. This podcast is designed for people who are learning languages, and each week we'll cover a different topic connected to language learning. Every other week, we'll bring you a mini-sode with different tips and tricks to help you on your language learning journey. Thanks for joining us today. I'm your host, Britta Potion Reader. I've been teaching English as a second language for over 10 years, and I'm learning French and Spanish. Language is my passion. This week, I'm joined by my guest hosts and colleagues, Lauren McIntosh and Nathan Elliott. Lauren and Nathan are my teammates as well on the Les Bons Mots project. Lauren has been teaching since 2014 and has taught English as a second language for the last 3 years. She has a master's degree in linguistics from University of Western Ontario and has recently finished her Ph.D. on communicative disorders in Alzheimer's disease. Congratulations, Dr. McIntosh.
Thank you.
Nathan has a Ph.D. in English literature and has worked as a professor in Georgia in the United States, on the island of Newfoundland, and in Montreal. Nathan has published creative nonfiction, fiction, research, and performed with the Montreal storytelling group Confabulation. We're going to be talking about language teaching and our work on Les Bons Mots, a topic that is exciting because these are our shared passions. Let's get started. Lauren and Nathan, welcome to Les Bons Mots. It's a pleasure to finally have you on the podcast.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
We have two major things in common, our roles as teachers and our roles in the Les Bons Mots project. Let's start with teaching. Lauren, what brought you to teaching English?
Well, like in your intro, I started teaching in 2014. And even when I was a little kid, I loved being the center of attention. And as a center of attention, there's nothing better than being a teacher. They all have to look at you. So, no, just kidding. I realized, though, at an early age, I do love teaching. I love bringing people from that level of not understanding something to that level of understanding.
Of course, when we talk about teaching English, sometimes it can be confusing. We might be talking about literature, we might be talking about English as a second language. And Nathan, you have experience in teaching English in a number of different ways, don't you?
Yes, I really do, across a number of different kinds of classrooms over a couple of decades now. I think I didn't realize I wanted to be a teacher until relatively late, until I'd already been teaching for some time. When I was growing up, I read all the time. I read compulsively. I read to the point of it harming my other studies. It made my mother crazy because I would not concentrate on anything else other than reading novels and sometimes poetry, really. And eventually I found an outlet in getting a Ph.D. in English, which was a good place to air that particular obsession. I kind of realized as I was going along that teaching might be part of the deal. And of course, I was getting a fellowship that included teaching. And I think the first few years I was paralyzed in front of the classroom. I was a very shy person, very introverted person. It was very difficult for me to be the center of attention, actually. At some point, though, I think maybe the third or fourth class that I taught, something flipped over, and I found that I enjoyed having conversations with people about things that I had read. And so those two things kind of came together, and I've enjoyed the classroom immensely ever since. It's that conversational aspect to the classroom that makes it really fascinating to me, and now I really need to be in it on a regular basis. And when I'm away from it for a while, I feel that lack very quickly.
For my part, my past life was in banking, which is not an obvious connection to teaching English as a second language. But I got to a point in my banking career where I was finding it unsatisfying and I wanted to make a change. And I thought, what would I do if I won the lottery? I would volunteer teaching English to newcomers to Canada. So while I was still working at the bank, I started volunteering teaching English, helping in a classroom. I really loved it. So while I was working at the bank, I did my certification in TESOL, teaching English as a second language, but I knew I wanted to be able to go a bit further. So I went back to school and I did my master's degree in adult education. So the good news is now I love my job. It's incredibly satisfying. And in addition to teaching, I get a chance to work on curriculum development and great projects. I never knew I would be hosting a podcast, but there you go.
Well, the video part is definitely my forte. I mean, I was in drama, as you can imagine. I mean, with teaching, it's something that I think, not to be arrogant about it, but I feel like when you want to be able to sort of help people that way, right? Helping people when they first come to Canada, or just coming from other parts of Canada. I came from British Columbia, so here I did the same thing, just with French.
Mm-hmm. Gives us a lot of empathy for our students, certainly when we've had the experience of learning another language.
Yes, whenever a student comes to me just really struggling or really frustrated, I can, with 100% certainty, say, I have been there. I know exactly what you mean.
For sure. I'm really curious. I love talking to other teachers and learning a bit about their teaching style. Nathan, how would you describe your teaching style?
Well, like I say, very conversational. I think going back to my previous answer, I think of myself as wanting to have a conversation, either in a small group or even with a larger class. I want to get a good conversation going, and I want everyone to be equally invested in that conversation. It's that back and forth, no matter what kind of classroom I'm in, whether it's ESL or if I'm in a literature classroom or if I'm in a writing classroom. I think that the give and take, the exchange of ideas is fascinating in them itself. And then I also like paying attention to, and I've always liked paying attention to the way that someone uses language ends up expressing their distinct personality, their history, and their geography. Even in my personal life, I'm now married to a Newfoundlander. She has a Newfoundland accent. My son has a Newfoundland accent, and it's just fascinating. And I can tell this has all had an impact on my own speech over the years. My favorite story about that actually is I came home from work one day when we were still living in Newfoundland, and my son, who was, I think, he must have been about 4 years old at the time, greeted me at the door waving a plastic lightsaber, shouting, "Luke, I am your father." And my wife was shouting from the back, "He has the accent." She was very happy about this particular incident. Um, so for her, the goal had been met, and I was delighted the entire time because I got to hear this accent in my own child.
It's definitely a playground to have accents and the interesting interlanguage that we hear as our students are acquiring language skills and developing their language. So I can imagine that must be a big appeal for you, Nathan.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, they're always teaching me too. I think here in Quebec, I'm trying to learn French, and of course, I'm trying to learn multiple French is. I'm learning, a certain kind of Parisian French at times when I use more formal methods. But then, of course, my Quebecois students are also teaching me various Quebecois accents, whether they know it or not.
Thanks, Nathan. Lauren, what about you? How would you describe your teaching style?
I believe it's called to be all formal here, the Socrates method, where basically I like to lead people to the answer. Obviously, there's going to be, for some of these deep fossilized errors, like the S and that kind of thing. I don't need to lead people to that. They know the S. But when I'm explaining concepts, I like to expose them a little bit at a time, and to have them come up with the answer. I kind of feed them a little bit as I go along. And to be honest, it took a while to fine tune that. At the beginning, I wasn't great at it. So I think I've improved on that over time. And I find that method, you can see when a concept hits home with them, and that satisfaction of kind of them coming up with it, as well as I think they remember a bit more that way. So I like to give them a little bit of information at a time, depending on their level, of course. But I just find that the product is just that much better.
Lauren, you mentioned fossilized errors. Perhaps we should explain that this is when a speaker produces an error so many times it becomes a normal part of their language, which makes it difficult to correct. So much of what both of you have said resonates for me. Nathan, you mentioned the meaningful communication, and this is something that I try to bring into my classroom as well, giving my students ways to practice and engage with English that are meaningful and also relevant to their realities, especially in a business context when our students have particular ways that they need to use English and they need to build their confidence and ability in those ways. I also really try hard to make the classroom, whether it's a real classroom or a virtual classroom, a comfortable place, and make sure, connected with what you're saying, Lauren, that we're providing adequate support to help learners reach the next step in their learning process. And this goes back as well to what Chris and I talked about in episode 3, where we talked about emotion lending, where we provide support to our learners so that they're able to achieve something a little bit more. So we've talked a little bit about our general teaching style. Maybe we can talk about a couple of things that we like to do in the classroom. Lauren, what are some of your favorite classroom activities or practices?
I'm glad I'm going first because I get to use all of the good ideas. So, since you guys, so I'm going to say all of them.
Please limit yourself to 2 or 3.
I find when you have a group, sometimes they know each other, right? Most of the time they don't. And so finding these kinds of icebreakers, ones that really get people to talk, and not just the yes, no, or my favorite, it depends. If I had a nickel for every time I got that answer, I would be a millionaire. So a lot of icebreakers, a lot of like, have you ever done this? Have you ever done that? Or when was the last time you have ever, I always put myself in that as well, that I usually share a lot of embarrassing stories, and I find that helps kind of loosens people up. But like you guys had said before, making people comfortable is the best kind of way. And one of my favorites is truth, truth, lie, or my favorite, lie, lie, truth, because lies are always more fun.
Yeah, those icebreakers are so crucial to building rapport in a group of students who may not know each other that well, or they may think they know each other very well, but there's always that opportunity to create a comfortable environment in the classroom. Nathan, what about for you? Do you have any particular activities or things you like to do in the classroom?
It really depends. To go back to Lauren's answer there, it depends on the classroom, it depends on the set of students that I have. I think that my overall goal is to find something that the group that is in front of me cares about. And when they are talking about something that they care about, they tend to start speaking more unconsciously and start paying less attention to saying everything properly. And that does a couple of different things for me. I can actually pick up on what their actual mistakes are and help them correct them. And I can identify how to help them improve their English. But it also makes it more fun for them. I think that they get more invested in the conversation in that way and more invested in communicating, which eventually makes them better speakers in the target language, in English in this case. So because these things are important to me, I do like to get them speaking about the art that they respond to, whether that's film or poetry or paintings or whatever it is, or sports. Sports is actually something that defenses go down very quickly when it's something that the speaker cares about quite deeply. So those are the subjects I like to bring up, and then to start shaping my lesson around the conversation that emerges.
And we can see a lot of those interests and those approaches in the blog posts that you're writing, in which you're engaging with the events of the day or different cultural or sports or music related topics. So, yeah, I have to say, I'm not totally surprised.
Yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. I bring those kinds of things into the classroom all the time. And I was actually writing a kind of proto version of this blog last year, or trying to when I had time. just to give people articles on subjects that they were interested in. And students were already responding to that when they found a subject that they were interested in. I could recommend an article on that. They tended to go and find that article and then reinforce the vocabulary that went with that. And of course, that's a place where they're rewarded very quickly for language acquisition, right? They're getting more on a subject that they already enjoy and getting the reinforcement. I know that works for me in French. When I read something interesting politically in French, it kind of drops away from me that I'm trying to learn vocabulary, and I get completely immersed. And so that's my ultimate goal.
I think that that's a theme that's come up again and again in this podcast last week with our French instructors, Nicole and Zoe, with previous guest hosts as well, is the idea of engaging in meaningful material as part of your language practice. So if there's something you're passionate about, engaging with that can be such a help.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Nathan, do you find that because of your background, you just come from a much more knowledgeable base than, I don't want to speak for Britta, so I'm going to speak entirely for myself. I don't know anything about that. Do you find that that helps?
I find that my life experience to this point helps a fair bit. I have studied Anglo-Saxon a little bit. I have a little bit of Latin back there. I see the bones of them both. I see the bones of both French and English, and that helps me, let students make connections between various words and various concepts. My hope is that I don't get too pedantic at times. I try to watch for when people's eyes are glazing over and I'm speaking for 5 minutes so that I can shut myself up. But
I would say that for my part, one of the things I like to do in the classroom is try to incorporate role play. I find that this can be quite a powerful tool, especially for people who have specific scenarios in which they need to use English, which a lot of our business students do. If they're able to practice the situations that they need, try it from as themselves, try it from a client perspective, it builds fluency, it builds confidence, and it lets me target exactly what functional language they need, what vocabulary they need, and help them build that, because what I've noticed in my classrooms, not only in Quebec, but when I was working in British Columbia and teaching in British Columbia as well, is that a common challenge that my students are facing is confidence. Sometimes this comes from a negative learning experience that they had in the past, a time that they were learning English and felt ashamed or felt worried, or sometimes it's just not having enough practice doing whatever they want or need to be doing. So I find that understanding my students' realities, helping them practice exactly what they need, it's one of my favorite things to do, and I feel like it addresses the confidence piece that I see sometimes students are missing. Nathan, what about for you? What are some of the challenges that you see students dealing with in your classrooms, and how do you help them overcome this?
I would actually, the first thing I just wanted to underline, emphasize what you said. I've been surprised this past year to find that confidence is such a big part of language learning. And I see that in my own classrooms. I see that as I try myself to negotiate French around Quebec. I see it with my young son trying to learn French coming from a different province. And I have actually taken advice from my own students, my more advanced English speakers. They've given me great advice for my son, actually, at times, when it comes to confidence. And I think that plays a really huge role. So I think helping them to feel comfortable is really important because that will increase confidence. And then I think a lot of things fall into place as confidence builds. Aside from that, and I think this is connected, I've also been surprised the degree to which, maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, but I have been, the degree to which pronunciation plays a role. Getting someone to pronounce a word in a way that's recognizable to the auditor is more important. And then the pronunciation goes beyond also the individual word. You might be able to pronounce the individual word correctly, but you need to be able to articulate the entire sentence in a rhythm that is recognizable to an English speaker. And that's where I've been experimenting and been pleased with the effect of having students read some poetry out loud. And I know that some students, as I joke with them, I know that they're not going to be using Emily Dickinson in their workplace on a regular basis. I don't have any illusions about that. But I know that poetry was used for hundreds, if not thousands of years in order to teach somebody sort of the proper way, quote unquote, and I put proper in heavy quotation marks, but it was used to teach somebody not just the vocabulary, but the rhythm and the stress of the language. And I was pleased to find that some of my students were responding quite quickly. And even from week to week, as they practiced a poem for me, they would pick up speaking speed and they would be a little bit more comprehensible when speaking. And they were very pleased as well. So many of my students come in and they say, what is your goal? I ask them, what is their goal? The very amorphous, like increase fluency. What does it mean to increase fluency? A lot of times I think oddly enough, it means increasing speaking speed, something closer to what they are in their native language. And I found that light use of poetry does increase their speed and their confidence. But
Well, poetry is something that every time you mention that, Nathan, I just always think, oh, that is such a good idea. And for me, I have found the common challenges, of course, is confidence. And I find that a lot of the time that people have the competency that people have in their head and what they actually say, there's a mistranslation that happens from their head down to their mouth. And how I sort of overcome that is I tell people to slow down, because everyone's mouth is running so fast and their brain can't catch up. And the other part, just to piggyback on the confidence comment, is I find with the basic learners, I find if you are stopping them, because they're going to make a lot of mistakes, I find if you're stopping them, every every word, there's something wrong. I find stopping them, you just derail their train of thought, you derail the conversation, and you destroy their confidence. So I pick and choose what I'm going to correct them on, and I do these soft corrections. Sometimes we have to do the hard corrections where I don't understand something, and I have to stop them just to say, "Whoa, whoa, whoa! What are you saying? Can you let's step back a second." So I'm speaking more about the beginners, the ones just starting out, for them building their confidence. So often I do let them go on a little bit just to get them talking in English. Because if you stop them, trying to get them started again, it's pretty much impossible.
I think a lot of us have that experience in our background as well. We formulate the sentence and we want to get the sentence out, and then when we're first learning a language, if we get interrupted in the middle, it really does derail that train and we don't have the confidence to repair it all the time.
Exactly. Well, I find, just to give a novel answer, is translating. Because when you're starting out, even when you're a little bit later, I don't know, but I'm sure this happens to everybody, is they're translating in their head and then they're using the French structure and trying to get them out of that habit. I find it's very, very hard. I don't have the proper solution yet with that, but I find you have to build that foundation, the English structure, the foundation there, because I find if you let them go on too long, they develop those deep fossils of the French structure. So getting them out of that habit, I think, is a common challenge.
Definitely, translation is something we all rely on when we're first learning, but then at a certain point, we have to try to let go of the translation a little bit and settle into the instincts that we're beginning to develop. And it can be a little bit scary because we can make mistakes doing that, but that's how we grow. That's how we get better. Mistakes are just a normal part of that. When we think about things we encounter in the classroom, challenges, activities that we do, we have to give a lot of advice as well. So I would ask you to share some of the advice that you find yourself often giving to language learners, or It could be some advice that you received yourself as a language learner that you've always kept in your mind, and perhaps in turn you share with your students. Uh, Nathan, would you start off?
Sure, I'll give it a shot. I think the answer that pops into my head when you ask that question is to try to find a way to relax a bit. If you can relax your brain and have fun with what you're trying to do, then you're going to be that much more likely to pick it up quickly. I think when you're emphasizing being correct or incorrect, when you're trying to get the good grade, in other words, and I think this is deeply instilled in all of us after 12, 14, 16, 20 years of education. We all want the good grade. And language, at the end of the day, despite the fact that we put it in classrooms and sometimes judge it this way, is about communication. It's not about getting a grade. And obviously, you want to get to the correct point. But when you think about the way that a child picks up language, he or she hears her parents and her peers using language, and especially for those first few years, the child is just having fun. Language is a kind of sandbox where you throw words around, and some words are funny, and so, sometimes you make mistakes and you laugh, and then you try to say it correctly the next time, and slowly you get better. And it's that need to let go of doing things right and the need to go towards having fun, I think that is the advice I try to give people. I realize for a number of reasons that that's not always easy advice to follow. And you need that language and you want that language to be fluent next week, but it just doesn't work that way. And the more you have fun, actually, the more you will improve and the more quickly you will improve. There's almost something Buddhist about it, where if you release your need for a teleological goal, you'll get there that much more quickly.
Yeah, it's counterintuitive, but it really works. Lauren, what about you?
Well, for me, I think it comes down to simplifying because we want our first language. I'm piggybacking on Nathan's comment, is that we want to be as good instantly as, as we are in our native language. And you feel almost like a child when you are learning a second language or third language. And that's where that translating, that problem happens, is that we try to use the complex structure of our native language, and you'll get there. You will get there eventually, that complexity of English. But at the beginning, you need to simplify. You need to understand the structure, how it works. The advice I give to people is pick a lane. If you'll find, especially using adverbs, and adverbs can go in a few different places, but pick one spot, learn that. Once you get comfortable with that, then figure out the other ways it happens. If you try to learn everything all at once, you're not going to remember anything. Phrasal verbs, pick 5, learn those, get comfortable, simplify, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. A lot of people feel like, oh, I need to get better faster. No. You're doing just fine.
It's going to sound like a broken record, but 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 I think there's a reason that we all give this kind of advice that's related to patience, taking time, and recognizing that it takes time to improve. It's because it's true. Often the problem is that it can be hard for us to see our own improvement when we're practicing day in, day out, week in, week out. So to a certain extent, I often advise my students to trust the people around them when they say, "Oh, your English is getting much better." Because those people sometimes, your teacher or your colleague or your partner, can be a little bit better judge of your progress than you can be yourself, just because progress is incremental and it's difficult for us to perceive as learners. So I would often tell my students that be patient, it takes time and effort, but it does come. Even if you can't recognize it in yourself, trust those people around you. It's happening.
Absolutely. Well, there's also the idea of consistency. Plurals, for example, right? Getting people to say the plural at the end. It might start off at 10, 20%, and by the end, it's maybe 60 or 70. That's huge, right? Just because it's not all the time doesn't mean that there hasn't been that improvement.
Definitely. There's a lot of advice that we give to our students, and of course, we're constantly giving feedback and instruction. But as a teacher, I find one of the most beautiful things is that I also continually learn a lot about a lot of different things. Nathan, what has teaching languages taught you?
I think the thing that it's taught me after a lifetime in the classroom, and as someone who at various times has been very good at hitting certain markers in the classroom that get you to the next level, somebody who got the grades when he needed to get the grades. Teaching languages has taught me how foolish our education system can be when it comes to learning. When you need to learn a language, you have a way of learning the language. And so, if there's a financial incentive, for instance, to learning a language, then people tend to to learn the language. And when people fall in love, if there's an erotic connection to language, people also tend to learn the language if that's necessary for the person that you've fallen in love with. It doesn't really connect, in other words, to your performance on a grade sheet or an evaluation form or anything else. And there's a lot of things in life like that where I think you find the reason that you're learning something, and then the motivation and everything else falls into place. You will learn just fine. You'll learn at the pace that you need to learn because you're not learning for the wrong reasons or for some other vain reason like a grade. You're learning for something that's important to you personally.
Thanks for sharing that with us, Nathan. I do think that the language classroom can be quite a profound place of learning for teachers. One of the things it's taught me is that communication is not about perfection. It's about building a shared understanding. And sometimes this can be messy, it can be complicated, it can be difficult, but eventually we get to where we're going. We're able to communicate. And I find this kind of communication very beautiful. The other thing that it's taught me is compassion, not only for my students, because I think I always had that, but self compassion, realizing that the same compassion that I offer to my students as learners, I can offer to myself as a learner because I have my teacher brain that's constantly assessing my own performance. So I have to also activate the other part of my teacher brain when I consider my own language performance and be like, no, you were sure you made some mistakes, but you got your message across. And this is the whole point of language. It's not perfection, it's communication, it's sharing ideas and understanding people. That to me is one of the most fundamental things that I've learned. Lauren, what about for you? What have you learned from being in the language classroom as a teacher?
Well, there's actually two things that come to mind. Nathan, you might you might like this. There's a certain poetry that comes from something being your second language. This is an example from years ago. In winter here in Quebec, it snows and then it melts a little bit and then it freezes again. And then there's snow on top of the ice. So you have sidewalk, ice, snow. We would call that layers. And a student was trying to explain that to me, and she called it slices. And I thought that was just one of the most beautiful things I'd ever heard. Like, I loved that. I have a little notebook that I write down just these things that I would never in a million years come up with. On a more practical note, the thing that just teaching in general, especially with language, is that everybody is different. I used to struggle a lot with teaching something one way, and it's just they're not getting it. There's a wall there. And then something happens just through a conversation, I say something in a particular way, or something happens and it just clicks. It's just something that works for one person does not work for the other. Some people need a more theoretical approach. Somebody just needs more drilling. Somebody just needs a conversation. Some people need confidence. Everybody is different, and I find there's no magical formula for everybody.
Thank you so much, both of you, for sharing that. It's such a key part of being a teacher, I think, is having the opportunity to reflect on the classroom experience on our own practices. And I think it's a key part of our professional development to have these opportunities to share and reflect. But for any of our listeners who are also teachers, we'd love it if you reached out and shared a little bit with us about your own teaching experience. So please don't hesitate to send us an email and let us know your thoughts. Let's turn to our other shared passion, the Les Bons Mots project. I think it's pretty clear to listeners of this podcast what my role is, although perhaps they don't know that I also plan and record and edit each episode and each mini-sode. Lauren, can you tell us about your role in the project?
Yes, so for those who are not familiar, I do the video portion of this project. And so you get to see my lovely face every week. And we all work together to talk about these similar topics, but the video is special in that way that I get to use a lot of visuals and a lot of graphics to illustrate some of the more difficult portions. The video allows me to give these kinds of visual scenarios. So by giving these scenarios, people can not only hear the TH pronunciation. A lot of people have difficulty with that, and so you get it in two parts. One, you get the visualization. The second part, you get me working alongside with you with the pronunciation. And so the visualization with the graphics and as well as me being there, I think the videos allow that kind of special opportunity. What I've particularly enjoyed about creating them is, like I said at the very beginning, I love being the center of attention, and it's just me in the videos. I've had a blast. Every single video has just been an absolute treat to make.
Nathan, we alluded to your role at Les Bons Mots earlier, but could you tell us a little bit about it and what you enjoy about doing it?
Sure. I write the blog posts. It's just that simple. If you're not listening and you're not watching, but you're reading instead, then you're reading what I wrote, at least so far. And to every piece of writing, there's a certain puzzle quality to me, where you're trying to fit different pieces together in a way that is comprehensible, enjoyable, and pleasurable for the person on the other side of that to read. And I think it's the element of the puzzle that's intriguing to me for this audience is thinking through them as not native readers of English. So I'm trying to write 3 or 4 paragraphs that are at least a little bit entertaining, brings them in to a subject that they may or may not know about, and then also to define some vocabulary for them, introduce some vocabulary, give them some new vocabulary in a small way. So I enjoy very much actually the dictionary, the glossary portion at the end of blog posts that I often put in. Defining words, thinking about words in a dictionary sort of way is just interesting to me. And so that's a fun part to write.
Excellent. I know that for myself, I really love having the opportunity with the podcast to talk to our talented colleagues and explore ideas that concern language learning either directly or tangentially. But it's just such a pleasure to be able to talk to each other, explore these ideas in more depth, and to be able to share that with other people who are passionate about language learning. I will say that there are occasionally challenges. For me, sometimes those are technical. So there was a steep learning curve at the beginning, but we get there in the end. But it's been very pleasurable to add another skill to my skill set. And now I quite enjoy the editing process. Nathan, has there been anything that's been particularly challenging for you in this project?
I think the challenge for me is generating the material. Once I have an idea, it's simple enough to write. Coming through with it on time, I think I've blown a few deadlines simply because I'm busy, and sometimes it's just difficult to come up with the idea on time. That's a difficult thing to do. I think too. I think this is kind of an odd challenge we're facing in 2020. I want to provide people a window into the news. I think that's a great way to build vocabulary because the news is always changing, it's always shifting, it's always giving you a kind of different window on the language's vocabulary, no matter which language you're reading in. However, in 2020, the news has become maybe a bit more depressing than usual, so I think it makes people a little bit more reluctant to read it. That's one problem. The other thing is that with the domination of the pandemic, it's flattened out the vocabulary, is what I've noticed, so that we're talking about the same subject repeatedly. I think we all learned the word for vaccine months ago. You know what I'm saying? That's been a particular challenge this year that I didn't expect. There's even certain subjects, for instance, the sports world got completely derailed, rearranged, and messed up, and it's made it difficult to access that subject, is what I've noticed. So there's these odd challenges the pandemic has presented in writing about what's going on in the world right now.
Excellent. Thank you. And Lauren, what about for you? Have you had any challenges that you've had to overcome during our project?
Well, I hope it doesn't show too much, but the video editing, of course, has was definitely a learning curve for me. Just the hours poured into it at the beginning has definitely decreased. Hopefully, I've gotten better at it. Also, it's sort of a cart before the horse kind of thing. As I was editing more, I recorded subsequent videos. I knew the editing process so I could record better. And on a more sort of less technical side, I was oddly enough very stoic at the beginning. I was very serious. And for those who have been my students, know that I'm not a very stoic person. So as I've become more comfortable, I think a bit more of my natural personality has come out in these videos. I catch myself being sometimes serious. Not necessarily too serious, but just sort of being more comfortable recording and editing. That was definitely a big challenge at the beginning.
I think we've all definitely gotten it a little bit more into our flow, both for content and for production as the project has gone on, for sure. We're going to move now to a quick fire round. We'll take a few minutes to just quickly answer some short questions, okay, on hopefully slightly lighter topics.
Sure.
Lauren, what is your favorite grammatical element or verb tense?
I might go slightly against the grain and say the simple present. I think it gets a bad rap because it's a tense that people learn at the very beginning and never like to use at any other time. But it's so useful. You can use it for the present. You can use it for the future. Like I have 5 meetings today. Like it's incredible. I think it gets a bad rap, and I think it should be used more.
Making a strong case for the simple present.
I like the past perfect tense just on a aesthetic level. It's the storytelling verb tense. When something had happened before something else had happened, then there's something already inherently sexy going on. It means drama, and the past perfect has always meant drama to me. I also like it just on a personal level. I think when I learned the pluperfect, as we would say, in Latin, something clicked over grammatically. I suddenly saw grammar in a new way. It brought a certain romance to grammar, whether that's in Latin or French or whatever language you're going towards.
For me, I have to piggyback on what you're saying, Nathan. I like one of the narrative tenses. Past progressive is probably one of my favorites just because it's so great for describing and storytelling. And I love it because it exists in French in the form of the imparfait, doesn't look the same but functions the same. And it's just a great one for painting a picture.
That's a good way for me to remember the imparfait, actually. So thank you.
Your mini lesson of the day.
Yeah, that's right.
Let's talk about parts of speech. What's our favorite part of speech? Nathan, go.
I don't know why, but I keep wanting to say the articles, both definite and indefinite. And I know they're very pedestrian. It's like one of the first things you learn. But I know, in a way, they're also very, very difficult to master. So when I've had Japanese or Chinese students and they don't have that same parts of speech coming out of their native language, it's actually the article that throws them and makes life difficult for years. And it's fascinating how that one way of distinguishing between the lamp that you bought for your wife or your wife telling you, go buy a lamp, like it's two wildly different things that get signaled by a couple of letters. And just there's a fascinating shift in ontology there that I like. It's pleasurable to me.
I have to say the verb is the heart of the sentence. It tells you what is going on. It can act by itself. It tells you the thematic roles that are required. It's such a powerful element To me, is the most powerful. So I'm kind of doing both sides, the underdog.
For me, I have to go with adjective because in my own writing, in my own speaking, in my own communication, I love to add a little bit of flavor. And to me, adjectives add the color, literally, and the flavor to communication. So I will never be Ernest Hemingway, who's famous for being sparse with his adjectives, keeping it to just your basic nouns, verbs, and maybe once in a while an adverb, but only if strictly necessary. I love the flavor of adjectives. So that's my favorite part of speech. Lauren, if you were a vegetable, what would you be?
I would be an artichoke because they have hearts.
And you, Nathan?
I like lentils. I think I would go with a lentil. Um, don't don't ask me too much why. I think because I see them as a very cosmopolitan vegetable. They you could eat lentils in Russia. You could be eating lentils in India, and it was actually a staple crop of the Palouse back where I grew up on the eastern Washington, central Idaho border.
Can I bend the rules and make it a fruit instead of a vegetable, or is that too illegal?
I'm not even sure a lentil is it. It's a legume, but whatever. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Good. Then I'm going to piggyback on talking about things that aren't vegetables, but are vegetable adjacent. In this case, a berry. And I'm going to go with blackberry. I would be a blackberry because they grow all over British Columbia where I'm from. And
Yeah.
I probably am 50% blackberry. I ate so many of these growing up. So that's my fruit. So, I mean, vegetable.
Blackberries are my favorite berry. Absolutely. I have a bunch of frozen ones from BC in my freezer right now.
Oh, I'm so jealous. So while we're on the food theme, Nathan, if you had to pick only one meal to eat for the rest of your life, would it be a breakfast, lunch, or dinner, and why?
I would have to go with breakfast. I like that first meal of the day, especially when I have time to cook a big breakfast for myself, for my son, for my spouse. That's some of the best times of my life. So it's just the meal I would go towards, absolutely. And the first taste of coffee in the morning is usually the best part of the day. It's all kind of downhill after that first swallow of coffee.
It's definitely a glorious
Yeah,
moment,
right.
the first victory of the day. What about for you, Lauren?
Well, I mean, there's no rules anymore. So berries. So I'm gonna say brunch, actually. So it's cheating, but I love savory crepes. I never had crepes until I came to Quebec, and the apple and Swiss cheese with maple syrup drizzled over. Oh my God, that's heaven for me. With coffee, of course.
Totally. I understand both of your love of the breakfast slash brunch meal. Personally, though, I have to say I would probably go for dinner or supper, the evening meal, because sometimes in the morning I don't really feel like eating. I'll just have a cup of coffee. And sometimes if I do feel like eating, I would rather be eating dinner food than breakfast food. So for me, it has to be supper slash dinner, depending on where you are in the country, but the evening meal. Let's do one more quickie. What is the one household chore that you will do to get out of other chores? I'm going to start with this one because I have an answer ready. I will clean the bathroom over washing, sweeping, or vacuuming the floors. I hate the floors. I will volunteer for bathroom cleaning duty every time, even though most people probably think I'm crazy because it's one of the most disgusting chores.
Well, I think we should just swap houses because I would do vacuuming in a heartbeat to get out of doing the bathroom. We don't divvy out the chores. It's kind of who gets there first. I always do the vacuuming because then it leaves. It's also very cathartic. Like you see a dirty spot, you take the vacuum over, and it's clean. It's to me, it's very satisfying.
What about for you, Nathan?
I worked in restaurants for a number of years, and I got very good at cleaning a kitchen very quickly. So there's something satisfying in simply getting a kitchen cleaned up very quickly, even when I hate the chore at the same time. A very, very odd relationship to that. So I'll clean up the kitchen as opposed to other things.
Excellent. So one day in the future, when we establish the Les Bons Mots resort/commune, we'll have all of the household chores covered, it sounds like. Bathrooms will be clean, kitchens will be clean, floors will be clean. Excellent. Every week, we offer our listeners a language learning recommendation. So let's get started. Is there anything you'd like to recommend our listeners check out this week, Nathan?
Sure, I got two actually, one dark and one light. The first is a book I'm reading right now. This would be for late intermediate to early advanced readers. And it's a book called Say Nothing by Patrick Keefe. It's about a murder in Northern Ireland in the 70s and the sectarian conflict that was taking place in Northern Ireland. Very compelling writing. If you like true crime, if you like political history, and if you like political history blended with true crime, then this book will be the book for you. The language, like I say, is pitched at I think a nice level for a language learner, and it's feeling very politically relevant at the moment right now. Obviously, Northern Ireland sectarian violence is probably a bit dark for some people right now, so I'll plug something that might be just under your nose that you might not think about, and that would be The Simpsons. I know has been a part of the atmosphere for decades. If you're Gen X, then you grew up with The Simpsons quite literally, and it's still around. I'm finding that Simpsons reruns are great when I switch on the Canadian French option on my streaming service. A lot of my students come to me and they say, well, this just doesn't sound like what I'm hearing on the street. And I say, I know. If you want to hear some idiomatic English, both in its funny and profane and all of its different moods, The Simpsons and its 30 bazillion episodes is not a bad place to start. And it's funny, it's entertaining, it's 20 minutes out of your time, and you'll pick up a few expressions and have some fun doing it.
And you, Lauren, what would you like to recommend that people check out this week?
Well, actually, some of my students and I are doing a collective watching of The Good Place for the present perfect, actually. And because it's all about the afterlife, they talk a lot about their experiences on Earth, which is a great use of the present perfect. And it's, even though it's about the afterlife, it's actually very fun. And it's very light. I think this is mostly for intermediate, and it's something that everybody has enjoyed.
Yeah, it's a very popular show, and Kristen Bell is quite hilarious in it. Nathan and Lauren, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. It's been a pleasure working with you on this project, and also a pleasure having you here today. Thank you so much for being willing to share so much about your teaching philosophy, your experiences, and of course, your preferred meal of the day. All crucial information.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
That brings us to the end of this season of Les Bons Mots. We want to thank you so much for joining us on this language learning journey, and we're really looking forward to season 2 starting in January, when we're going to bring you fresh information, topics, blog posts, instructional videos, and new guests as well here on our podcast. Please be sure to visit us on our website at lesbonsmots.ca. We always have fresh content, and we look forward to seeing you there. Do you have any questions or suggestions? We'd love to hear from you. You can email us at lesbonsmots@lesateliers.ca or find us on Facebook and Instagram at lesateliers.ca. Reach out to us if you're interested in learning more about our language training programs, or if you want to talk to us about ways in which you can improve your skills. If you enjoyed this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast to help other language learners find us. Thanks again, and happy practicing.